2 weeks before leaving office, U.S. President Joe Biden has spoken to new Democratic members of Congress about the importance of enabling the peaceful transfer of power. Biden was speaking Sunday, a day ahead of the 4th anniversary of the storming of the U.S. Capitol building, when then-President Donald Trump supporters tried to stop the certification of the 2020 election.
Now it's your duty to tell the truth, to remember what happened, and not let January 6th be rewritten or even erased. To honor the Constitution, not only the most extraordinary of days, but it's one of the toughest days in American history, January 6th.
Now, as Trump prepares to return to the White House, he has promised to pardon many of the people charged with criminal offenses that day. Here's a look at what that could mean for the defendants and for democracy.
January 6th, 2021. An assault on democracy as a mob summoned by President Donald Trump stormed the U.S. Capitol building. 4 people among the crowd died. 5 police officers were dead within days. The vice president and leaders of the Senate and House narrowly escaped as intruders roamed the halls. The biggest investigation in the history of the U.S. Justice Department followed. More than 1,500 people were arrested on charges ranging from assaulting police to trespassing to obstructing official proceedings. More than 1,000 have pled guilty and more than 250 have been convicted in court, while other trials and arrests continue. Some of the rioters became prominent figures, like the so-called QAnon shaman, and the man who put his feet up on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's desk. Both were sentenced to years in prison. Now, thanks to Donald Trump taking office again, they could soon be free, while others could see charges dropped. Trump has promised to pardon the rioters on day one, using the legal system, his constitutional power to grant pardons to overturn efforts to hold people accountable for trying to override an election. It was even part of his campaign.
Would you pardon
What's
those
going to
people?
happen? Oh, absolutely, I would.
You would pardon those?
If they're innocent, I would pardon them.
Trump has called those arrested hostages and during his campaign regularly played an anthem by the so-called January 6th prison choir. But Trump has been vague about exactly who will get a pardon. He's never promised to pardon everyone who was charged that day, and recently said he wouldn't pardon people who were, quote, radical or crazy. Trump could issue a blanket pardon for those charged with specific offenses like trespassing. But he's said he'll be looking into individual cases, which would take time. It's also unclear what he'll do about the highest-profile convicts, leaders of far-right organizations like the Oath Keepers, and the Proud Boys, who were convicted for encouraging their followers to take part. Trump's statements have left many questions unanswered. But his day one promise is clear. Pardoning those who tried to keep him in office, against the will of the voters, is a priority.
Joining us now from Berlin, we have Cathryn Clüver Ashbrook, a senior advisor at the Bertelsmann Foundation and an expert on U.S. politics. Welcome to the show. I'd like to pick up on these possible pardons. How many do you think Trump might grant, and what signal would that send?
Well, I think good morning, first of all. I think the number is almost secondary to the fact that this is, in fact, a first day promise. And I think the images made it entirely clear. You cannot argue with the facts of what happened on January 6th. But over the past 4 years, we have seen an entire retelling of the January 6th story, beginning with the kind of comments that Matt Gaetz made on the House floor a day after January 6th, saying that this was, a mob run by Antifa, that Trump had nothing to do with it. I think American voters have understood that Donald Trump did, in fact, cause this insurrection, and he has taken responsibility in the way that he has said that he will pardon some of the offenses committed on January 6th. Now, of course, those are a varying degree of offenses. Some defendants, who were criminally prosecuted, are serving 22 years in jail, in part, by the way, by judges that Donald Trump put into various courts. So that will be a difficult legal situation for Donald Trump to unspin. But by that same token, of course, there are lesser sentences that he will try to get commuted, get people back on the streets. The signal is that you can grossly violate American democracy, American norms, the principles and the integrity of American decision-making by the voter, as we just heard in the wrap of your piece, and go away effectively unpunished. And that is a very dangerous precedent.
The outgoing President Joe Biden has again called President-elect Trump a threat to democracy. But we have to say Trump won the popular vote in these most recent elections. What does that tell you about how American voters are thinking? Do they just not care about democracy as an issue?
Well, we saw in the polling ahead of the election that democracy, as titled with the D word, was less popular, was less concerning for many voters. The economy, the price of eggs, frankly, by the way, was one of the most decisive factors in what drove Americans to the polls. And yet the idea of freedom as manifested in the rights to cast an unfettered, unrestricted vote, an unrestricted ballot, still remains high on the list of priorities for Americans. And yet, of course, we now have both a majority in both chambers of the American House and, of course, an executive run by Donald Trump that wants to put executive power right back at the heart of American democracy in a big constitutional debate, and a Supreme Court that gave this president, Donald Trump, effectively blanket immunity so that the crimes that he was charged by the Biden Justice Department will not be prosecuted in the way that it was intended by Jack Smith, the special counsel. So the signal that it sends, I think, to the American voters is that democracy remains a volatile good, remains something that clearly needs to be fought for. And we might see pernicious changes in this idea of rewriting American democracy such that there might be changes to the voting system, changes to how American elections are run under the auspices and idea of democracy, but that in fact actually curtail the freedom of the American vote and the freedom of those, of all Americans to vote. And that is something I am supremely worried about.
Now, just briefly, as you've said, all three branches of American government essentially under conservative control as we go into this new administration. What role can Democrats then play as opposition?
Well, it's been interesting how weak the Democratic opposition has been up to this point. Listening to Hakeem Jeffries at the opening of the 119th Congress, it would make you think that they are going to, on a number of critical issues, work hand in glove with this administration. He noted, of course, to progress the interests of the American people, and the Democrats in that sense are still very much licking their wounds of having so misread the American public opinion and the American vote. And by that same token, what they need to do is to push back against particularly some of the cuts that will look very likely through the Department of Government Efficiency run by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy that will target the poorest and most needy in American society, the recipients of Medicaid, Medicare, food stamps. Those are the things that are on the chopping block. And when it comes to curtailing discretionary spending, they will have to find ways of standing up for that. And in the ways that the majorities are constructed and how slim they are, obstruction is frankly almost the only tool that they have in their toolkit right now. But they will need an actual progressive agenda moving into the midterms.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today. That's U.S. political analyst Cathryn Clüver Ashbrook in Berlin.